Hello and welcome to another video on my warehousing course. One of the things I'd like to look at is legislation. Let's start off with an interesting piece of legislation, the Equalities Act 2010. This does enter into the standards for the Level 1 and Level 2 qualifications, so it's worth knowing about. It's also useful to understand this for employment anyway. So what is it? What's its history? Well, the history starts off pretty much with the suffragettes. If you go back to the early part of this century, women didn't have the vote. In fact, they didn't have a lot of things. Even as late as the 1970s, if a woman wanted a bank account, she still needed either a relative, a male relative, or her husband to sign to say that she was trustworthy enough to do it. Yeah. So women didn't have the vote, and the suffragettes started a campaign of disruption and, in effect, social sort of or public disorder to some extent. Anyway, a lot of them ended up in prison, and it wasn't looking good until the First World War came along. When the suffragette movement said, look, government of the day, you're going to need all hands to the tiller. Now, as long as we don't oppose your war and pitch in and help, we'll do so. But we want the vote. And they got it. Yay. So that was the first piece, really, of equalities legislation aimed really at females. And there were other pieces of legislation that came in. For example, the equal pay legislation that said that men and women should earn the same amount of money. Yeah, it's still a long way from happening, really. Then you've got other legislation. Again, you've seen about the Windrush generation and how after the war we didn't have skilled labour or, that sort of thing. So we brought it in from the colonies. And again, this led to some racial tensions. So you had Race Discrimination Act coming in. And again, 1970s were a big time for these sort of acts. But again, it got to a stage where, even things like in British history, LGBT issues, it was still a crime until relatively recently to be gay. And then you had Thatcher's introducing a law where it was illegal to promote gay education or to talk about it. So it's like, yeah. And on the strength of that, a lot of organisations were formed to fight this. Anyway, we had lots of legislation coming in, and the problem was for small employers, it became very much of an issue to keep up to date with various bits of legislation promoting equality about various things. So they introduced an Equalities Act, 2010 variant, where it says, look, all of these various acts and whatever aimed at, equality, all doing pretty much the same thing. So why not just have one act and then just have certain protected characteristics? Now, originally there were 6 protected characteristics. Male and female, obviously. Race, religion, and disability, and of course sexual preference. But then you had, it wasn't enough. So recently they've added another 3. Same-sex marriages or civil partnerships have been added. Pregnancy, which might surprise some of you, but it's actually on there, and transgender. So let's have a look at a few of these and figure out, the whys and wherefores. Firstly, age. Why the heck is age on there? Right, to answer this one, it's looking at pensions, and more to the point, the ticking time bomb of the pensions. Now, they did, they've been known about this for ages. Thatcher, back in the 80s, introduced private pensions because we knew that pensions were a ticking time bomb that were going to go off soon. And even back in the 90s, they did a study that if things went on as they were and nothing happened, they estimated that by 2020, if they did nothing, then 1/3 of the working population would be not working but retired. Now, back in the day when we brought the pensions in, it was a sucker bet. You worked until you were 65, and at the age of 65, you were done. You were burnt out. You'd run your course. And just to help you along with your retirement, they made sure that the television included things like the test card transmission and Pebble Mill at 1. And after that sort of viewing and going down to the pub to play dominoes or what have you, 2 years and you were dead. And they estimated that we could support on the pension provision 2% of the population to remain retired. You had a few aberrations who would live until their 80s or so, but the majority dead within 2 years. So 2%, not 30%. No way in hell could any economy accommodate 1/3 of its population sitting about watching Pebble Mill at 1. So what to do? Well, heighten the retirement age. Yeah, that's part of it. And also you've got handing the responsibility for the pensions over to private employers. So you put in, we put in, that sort of thing. You've seen the adverts. So getting more employer contributions. And also, and this is where the Act comes in, making it illegal to mandatorily retire somebody at 65, or as it was then, and also not, refusing to hire somebody just because of their age. And that works both ways, too young, too old, too whatever. So one of the things that you do, for example, is you don't put your age on CVs, so that it's more of a level playing field. But that's why age is protected, and it's purely economic. Okay, male and female. Yeah, sex discrimination. It's illegal to discriminate against somebody because of their sex, and you can sort of understand that. Now, a classic one is Birmingham City Council. They had been blatantly paying their male employees more than their female employees for the same roles. Courts told them about it, and eventually the employees took them to court, and it costs them an arm and a leg, or more to the point, it costs them the rights on the Bullring Centre and the NEC. Because the court found that not only were they doing it, but they'd been doing it for some time. So they said, look, go back 10 years, everybody that you owe money to, find them, even if they've left the company, and pay them what you owe them, plus interest. So the original £300 million finding turned into something like 1.4 billion. Yeah. Yeah. So what you find with the Equalities Act is that there's quite a bit out there that, it has teeth. But it tends to be at the larger employers. So large companies are very much into this. Okay, so that's sex discrimination. Also, you've got things like race discrimination. It still happens. It does. And again, it's illegal for this to happen for obvious reasons. We are a multicultural society. The 1940s days where everybody knew everybody in the previous village or whatever, that world's gone. It's been gone for ages. We're a multicultural society that has plenty of people in it. Get used to it. Okay, moving on. Religious belief. Now, we have had this as a cornerstone of our democracy since year dot. The Jews, for example, have been here since the 11th century, and we didn't go on any sort of big persecutions to make them convert to Christianity. I think that was the Spanish Inquisition's thing. Also, with the Protestant and Catholic thing, if we had been in the mood to tell people what they could do and couldn't do religiously speaking, there would be no Catholics in the UK. there are Catholics in the UK. And, they're not just people that have come from Ireland. There are Catholics who have been born and brought up here for several generations. So suddenly having other religions that traditionally we didn't have in the country, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, whatever, it's just another religion that we have to protect. But the thing is, as soon as I tell you what you should believe in and what God you should worship, we are no longer a democracy. So this is why it's very important to quote, I think it was Voltaire, basically he said that I don't believe in what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And this is the cornerstone of democracy. People have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and so on and so forth. So there's nothing new that the Act's doing for this. It's just putting it in black and white. But we've always done it. Okay, as I said, LGBT. It was for some time illegal to be gay, and you could do prison time for being gay. Okay, so there's been some progress made, but also, things have moved on quite a bit, and it's no longer seen as shock horror to be gay. It's just, who you are. And this is quite healthy for society, because how are we going to move on if sections of us are afraid to go out or, participate in society? Yeah. So, no longer illegal to be gay. In fact, you have every right to like who you like. No biggie. And the Act provides for this. So you cannot refuse somebody work or various other bits or sack them for being gay. It's ridiculous. Okay. Disability. Now, I've worked for a disability charity, and here's the thing. People with disabilities don't like being labelled as disabled for a lot of the time and want to get on with their lives. And yet being put into a box whereby, you can't do this, or nobody wants to stay at home all day feeling like they're a burden on society, which a lot of people do. And they would much rather be out earning a living. And a lot of the disabled charities out there promote, people getting jobs with disabilities. Imagine that you have a life-changing injury in a car accident or something. You wouldn't want to spend the rest of your day sat at home being cared for. You want to go out and do something. And the Act, again, promotes this. In addition to this, even before the Act, there was funding available for companies to access to make reasonable adjustments. And this is a thing. With the Act, you don't have to disclose a disability because not all of them are obvious. But a company, once they've hired you, must make reasonable adjustments. And there's a government fund out there. Let's say that you've got a bad back. Not easily obvious, but as long as it doesn't affect the core element of the job, then what's stopping you from working? But let's say that in order to sit down at a computer all day, you need to sit in rather than an ordinary chair, something like Darth Vader's bathroom. The Act will pay for that. Reasonable adjustments wouldn't, for example, if you were getting a job as a roofer, they wouldn't adjust for putting a lift or elevator on the side of a scaffolding so you can get up there in your wheelchair to be a roofer. It's not a reasonable adjustment. So as long as your disability doesn't affect the core element of the job, it's no issue. But reasonable adjustments, let's say the reasonable adjustment is a voice thing for computers because you're partially sighted. Yeah, no problem. It'll pay for that. Let's say that your reasonable adjustment, that you can't get to work on public transport. It'll pay for a taxi every day to and from work. Let's say that the reasonable adjustment is that you need a helper sitting next to you to help you do your job. It'll pay for that as well. Oh, that's too much money, I hear you say. Yeah, how much do you think PIP payments cost? It's cheaper to pay for these reasonable adjustments and get people into work to then pay taxes than it is to pay them to stay at home and be disabled. Yeah. So it's, again, good for the economy, and you're not taking as much money out of the economy if you're doing this. Okay, so let's look at the other protected characteristics. Same-sex marriages, civil partnerships. Now, many people assume that marriage is about God and religion, and just because that's where it happens doesn't necessarily mean what it's about. Here's the problem. Same-sex couple, been living together for 20 years, one of the partner dies. There have been cases where, because they've had no legal protection, the relatives can just come in, sell everything out from under the surviving partner, and make them homeless. This is not fair, this is not right, and I'm sure that the deceased person didn't want that to happen to their nearest and dearest. So civil partnerships are about providing legal protection. And when you look at marriages, they're in effect a shared debt, a shared common place. So if one partner racks up a debt, the other person has to pay for it. So it's legal accountability as well. And that's all that's happening with the civil partnerships. Yes, it's a declaration of love and, commitment to each other, but it's also providing that legal protection. Okay. Pregnancy. It's sad in a society where you have to protect somebody's right to be pregnant. But this is an offshoot of the sex discrimination thing. You do see people that say, oh, I'm not going to hire that woman because she's this age, and because she's that age, she might go off and get pregnant, and I can't afford that. A lot of businesses can't afford that. But, if that's the stance you take, then women will never have true equality because they'll have to give up their jobs and their careers to raise a family. Okay, but also not hiring somebody because of something that might happen. So this is why the protections in there. You have the right to have a child, you have the right to set protections and so on and so forth. So that's healthy. Okay, last one, transgender. Okay. A lot of people mistake the fact that it's a man in a dress and that this is a new thing. This isn't a new thing. This is, you can find people in history throughout who haven't been happy with their genders. There is medical science to back it up as well. They've always stated that they felt like they were in the wrong body or man trapped in a woman's body, vice versa. Medical science actually backs this up. You've got things like MRI scans and CAT scans and various things. And, simple question, is there a difference between male and female brains? Well, yes, there is. What you find is that the male brain has a dark area in the centre of it when viewed from above, whereas the female brain has this triangular pattern of three dark areas. Brains tend to be a bit smaller because of physiology, but it's not about the size, it's the number of neurons. But anyway, viewed from above, you've got these triangular black areas, 1, 2, 3, whereas the males have a black area in the centre. 3 guesses what the MRIs showed for transgender. Female brain, male body. And they reckon that what's happening there is that during in the womb, if the steady drip of testosterone to make you a male is interrupted at any stage, you can get intersex. This is where you've got things like XXY chromosomes, or XYY, this sort of thing. This is where you end up with female secondary characteristics or characteristics of both genders. The other interesting thing is that, genetically, if you're XX chromosomes, you must be female. 46XX. Interesting one. You end up with male characteristics, but with genetically, you're XX. Yeah, interesting stuff. And there's lots of variations on this. So you can have intersex, or you can have variations on a theme. So why doesn't somebody give them therapy? Medical science tried this. They tried this from 1900s and various other bits onwards, and eventually in the early 70s, medical science reached a conclusion, and that was there's nothing to change here. This is their core being, their core personality. Now, they did talking to them and the usual therapy that way. They tried medication. They tried aversion therapy, the full straitjacket, mental asylum, full 9 yards type thing. Yeah, didn't work. Medical science was then left with a problem. You see, the Hippocratic Oath says, do no harm. And yet here they are shocking and abusing people to change them when they know that they can't change them, so they're doing harm. What to do? Well, if they can't change the brain to suit the body, they can change the body to suit the brain. It's simple surgery. And if that stops the high suicide rates, and there are high suicide rates. In a study of LGBT, Stonewall, in its school report, showed that school children under 16 have higher suicide rates with the LGBT, and it's up to about 90-odd% if you're transgender. Yeah. Well, actually, it's 90% self-harm. It's about 80 to 90% self-harm. It's about 40-something% for the suicide rates. My own. So, big suicide rates, big self-harm rates, which suddenly drop when they come out of the closet, as it was, get help, and start being, themselves, in effect. So there's good medical grounds for this. And regardless of what certain religious people will say, and they are misquoting big time on the religion, any interpretations from what I've read, then it comes back to this whole equal rights legislation. You have the right to be who you are, whether it's gay, disabled, male, female, transgender, whatever. Okay, so how does the law work on this anyway? Well, a few cases have been brought. For example, travellers being refused entry into Wetherspoon's pub during the traveller convention or what have you, purely because they were travellers. The law showed that that was racial discrimination, and therefore, another one, a self-employed person working for a company had a heart attack, and the company said you're not entitled to any medical benefits on that. So I took him to court under the Equalities Act, and they found that yes, his disability wasn't being addressed because he only worked there. Didn't work anywhere else, so therefore he was an employee, or at least a worker under the designation. So a lot of these cases are not big LGBT things and banner waving or what have you. They are serious, everyday questions about disability and discrimination that affect everyday people's careers. So that's the equalities legislation. Any questions? Put them, pop them in the space below and I'll try and answer them. Moving on from that, I'd like to talk a bit more about warehouse-specific things like COSH and health and safety, but that's for another video. In the meantime,